Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 5th of August 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Sun is shining.
The sun is shining. The question is, are we heading for a general election? Well, we think we are, as we mentioned last week. Lots of other people suggesting that we are now as well. But Matt Hancock says no. Here he is. He said, I don't want one. I don't think we need one. So that pretty much guarantees we're going to have one. Boris only with a majority of one, of course, now. So Matt Hancock was on the Today programme this morning. He said, honestly, I haven't talked to Dominic or the Prime Minister or anybody else in Westminster about this idea. Now, of course, he's talking there about Dominic Grieve, who is, well, many people view him as the leading opponent of Brexit within the Tory party. And he said that there remained to be a number of things that could be done by the House of Commons to prevent a no deal, including bringing down the government. So that would mean a no confidence vote in Boris Johnson, setting up a new government in its place. But as I say, Matt Hancock saying he doesn't want a general election. He doesn't think we need one. He thinks that what they need to deliver is to deliver Brexit and deliver on the top domestic priority, which is the NHS. Now, of course, Boris today has made a statement. Sorry, I apologise. I'm running ahead of myself there. Boris has made a statement on the NHS today. More beds, he says, new cutting-edge equipment, additional wards to be delivered at hospitals across the country. And he has confirmed a £1.8 billion extra cash injection for the NHS. So this was delivered, as I mentioned, while he was visiting Lincolnshire today, and 20 hospitals, £850 million in new funding to upgrade outdated facilities, $1 billion to boost NHS capital spending. Anybody would think he's on the campaign trail. But thinking back to what Dominic Grieve had said, that a number of things that the House of Commons to do to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Well, as I say, people getting on the possibility of a general election. This is the Independent. And the Independent saying that the Prime Minister is plotting a people versus politicians general election. This is a pretty dangerous development, Brian, because really what they're attempting to do is to pitch the general population against politicians. And that's not going to end well.
It's not going to end well. And the other bit we've got to consider is who has the voice of the people at the moment, because the average person doesn't have a voice. This brings us to participatory democracy, where it's the big NGOs and the charities that receive all of the money from the trust and indeed the government that supposedly provides the voice. So you're going to see the shouting by these organisations as if they are the voice of the people, but what will they be doing running a political agenda?
But the broader issue here, as I think a few people are starting to commentate on now, is, as we said on Friday's programme, Boris saying that he wants to keep the union together, and we were asking which union was he talking about, because we don't believe it's the United Kingdom that he's talking about, the UK union. Of course, if you pit people against politicians, you're effectively attacking the Constitution. Yep. And that's probably going to end up with the breaking up of the UK.
Well, it fits, doesn't it? UK is causing a problem to the European Union. So what do? You break up the United Kingdom. You just leave it parked on the edge of continental Europe. Job partly done. Okay, well, let's move on then to the Inf Treaty. The war of words is continuing, and today it's the Russians speaking out. This, of course, follows the US withdrawal from the treaty on Friday last week. Here's the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Ryabkov. He was speaking to the press today. He said, in fact, the US has not taken any necessary steps on rectifying violations of its commitments under the treaty. Now, of course, both the US, the UK, Europe, and, well, perhaps less Europe, but certainly NATO, saying that Russia is absolutely outside the scope of the treaty, and therefore the US has
has sort of removed itself from that and broken the treaty. But the Russians saying that the deployment of Mk-41 launchers of cruise missiles on the ground is banned under the treaty. The US has been doing that. No progress has either been made on so-called target missiles fired by the US from the ground tests, or to test their air defense system, which is similar by their characteristics to ballistic, intermediate, and short-range missiles. But they also said this. This also concerns the Pentagon's use of unmanned combat aerial vehicles, which are fully defined by the treaty's terms, such as a ground-based cruise missile. So the Russians highlighting a whole range of areas where they believe the United States has been in breach of the treaty. They are a bit concerned that the US has unilaterally withdrawn from the treaty. They're saying they want to keep dialogue open, and they're continuing to invite the US to speak more about this, but of course that isn't happening at this point.
US withdrawing. Well, meanwhile, we've got, I'm not quite sure of how to describe it. Dross is a word I use quite a lot with respect to so-called mainstream reporting, but I think the Express wins the Dross prize here. The title is Iran War. Expert reveals who would win in UK versus Iran fight. Back to Middle Ages, the likely outcome of a war between the UK and Iran has been revealed by a top foreign policy writer who claimed Britain could send the Middle Eastern state back to the Middle Ages. This, to me, was some of the worst journalism I've seen over the last few months, and it's a pretty difficult field, a lot of competition. But let's have a look at what they said here and how it went. So this is the gentleman they refer to. He's called Mr. Peck. He said that the Iranian Air Force is a museum mix of a handful of old American-made F-14 and F-4 fighters and Russian-made aircraft. Britain has the advanced Eurofighter Typhoon, has now received its first F-35 stealth fighters, 6 of them I think it is, and can support its combat aircraft with an array of tankers, electronic warfare planes and drones. Well, this is all complete nonsense, because we just don't have that operational capability. But this is what the smiling gentleman says. And then he goes on to say, while Iran may or may not be developing nuclear weapons, Britain most certainly has them, 4 Vanguard-class nuclear submarines, and we can send the Iranians back into the Middle Ages. But he then points out that the UK will be unlikely to use these nuclear weapons for political and humanitarian reasons.
Really?
Yeah.
So we can't send them back to the Middle Ages then?
Well, no. But let's come back to the reporter. It's James Bickerton. Now, I believe this gentleman used to work for Sarah Wollaston MP. So according to the paper, he joined the Express in June 2018, previously worked in politics and PR, there we are, including a year-long stint in the parliamentary office of Dr. Sarah Wollaston MP. Politics remains his primary interest, and he's always keen to chase up stories on the subject. So no substance, no real facts, no proper analysis, just a hype story that we could use nuclear weapons against Iran, but we're not going to do so for humanitarian reasons. This is complete dross, Mike, and it's being pushed out there as if this is substance, journalism with substance.
Don't think there's such a thing in this country anymore.
Fake news.
Well, good news, Brian, really good news, because speaking of Britain's typhoons, here is one. Well, a £346.7 million contract has been awarded to Rolls-Royce to provide maintenance for the EJ200 engines that are in our RAF Typhoons, and this is up until 2024. As the Typhoon continues to form the backbone of the RAF fighter jet fleet. I thought the F-35 was going to be taking over, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So apparently already this year, according to the Ministry of Defence, RAF Typhoons have led the fight against Daesh in Iraq and Syria as part of Operation Shader. And they've also undertaken Baltic air policing missions with NATO partners, and further NATO policing missions planned in Iceland for later this year. Why are we policing Iceland?
I really don't know.
No.
Perhaps I should, but I don't.
There you go. Anyway, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who's just been made Defence Minister, said not only will this contract help to maintain our world-class jets, it secures 175 jobs across the UK and boosts the skills base. So well, that's good stuff. But of course, what Anne-Marie Trevelyan nor any other representative of the Ministry of Defence has told us is what is going to be happening with the maintenance of F-35 engines, because of course Turkey was supposed to be providing that, as we've mentioned on this programme many times, but we still don't know who is going to be managing that in the coming months and years. I'm assuming that F-35s will need engine maintenance at some point, but apparently not, because we don't seem to be too concerned about the fact that Turkey's been thrown out of the F-35 club and we don't have a replacement.
Right. So this is a key story here, Mike. Any proper investigation by the press and the media into this, nobody's digging into this, nobody's pointing out that at the moment we've got an F-35 program with no proper background. What are the press doing? Well, let's have a look at the Telegraph and what they've got to say. So this is an amazing dross story by the Telegraph. What's it about? A Russian super quiet submarine is feared to be operating in British waters. Now, there's nothing about that title in the actual article itself. It's a made-up article, and we'll pull it apart a little bit. A new breed of super quiet Russian submarines are feared to be operating unseen in British territorial waters, according to military sources.
Unseen by whom?
Well, exactly. The new Russian Kilo-class submarines are feared to be threatening UK security by tracking Britain's fleet in the North Atlantic undetected or by tapping into undersea internet cables. Now, I'm not sure what fleet they're talking about because we don't have a fleet, but it goes on. HMS Queen Elizabeth, the Royal Navy's flagship aircraft carrier without any aircraft, and the nation's nuclear deterrent submarines could be vulnerable to the Russian boats' stealth technology, extended combat range, and ability to strike targets above and below the water as well as on land. So let's have a look at this. What is the Telegraph not talking about? Well, the fact that the real problem is not the equipment the Russians have got, but the fact that all of our equipment, all of our anti-submarine warfare capability is gone. So we scrapped the anti-submarine warfare carriers, they disappeared. We got rid of all the maritime patrol aircraft to find those Russian submarines, particularly conventional ones like the Kilo. We got rid of the ASW frigate fleet. We got rid of our nuclear submarine fleet. We got rid of all of our diesel electric submarines, our equivalent to the Kilo. They all disappeared. We wrecked development and procurement, and we got rid of all our skilled and experienced people. But the Telegraph doesn't talk about this. It just pumps out the hype story on the Russians.
The UK nuclear submarine fleet decimated. Well, of course, there's 13 of them parked not too far away from this studio at the moment.
Well, all of those quite elderly boats, that's correct, but we haven't brought in a proper replacement for them, and at the moment we do not have enough boats to do the job. But also we've wrecked recruitment, so we can't even bring the people into the Royal Navy. So let's have a look at the Telegraph's claims. A new breed of super quiet submarines. Well, the fact is the Kilo class is diesel electric. It's basically a very old design. It's certainly not new because it's Cold War, end of Cold War era, and it's always been very quiet. So this is pure hype by the Telegraph. Highly maneuverable. Well, it's a conventional submarine. They're usually smaller. They're usually more highly maneuverable. So there's nothing here. HMS Queen Elizabeth and UK nuclear deterrent submarines could be vulnerable. Well, basically, they've always been vulnerable to these types of submarines. So absolutely nothing new in this story at all. Thought to have tested how easily it could be detected. So we're to believe that the Russians deliberately sent this latest submarine into waters in order to be detected. This is complete nonsense. If it's super quiet, they're going to want to protect that advantage, not flaunt it to allow the capability to be disclosed. The Russian submarines are thought to be able to work with deep water survey ships and tap into undersea cables and eavesdrop on telecommunication system. Well, there's nothing new there because NATO submarines play the same game. So what have we got again? We've got pure fake news. And you know it's fake news because he even has to bring in the hunt for Red October to wind up the fear of the public. It's complete dross. And if people want to do a little more research, you can go back and find that we got rid of our last diesel electric submarines at the end of the Cold War. Type 2400s, the ones that were built, were sent to Canada. A lot of people in the Royal Navy at the time said this is a big mistake. We got rid of them, the Russians carried on developing them, and now the paper is crowing that this is some new super weapon. This is complete nonsense. And I'll just add on the end of it that the Guardian reporting that Harland and Wolff shipyard expected to go into administration. Another small piece of UK shipbuilding capability is going to be lost. That's 130 jobs, I think you said. But as you've just reported, I've forgotten the lady's name, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, boasting that 175 jobs are going to be created somewhere. Well, if 175 are being created, we're losing 130 here.
Well, I mean, Harland and Wolff has been in decline for many, many years because, of course, none of the contracts for what few British warships went to that shipyard, or really to too many British shipyards. It's ended up maintaining oil rigs and more recently getting involved in helping to build offshore wind turbines. And they've been sitting waiting to see whether the UK government was going to throw any contracts in their direction for next generation frigates and so on, which they haven't had. And there's been talk for a year or so, a year or two now, that these two cranes that have been there for a very long time now, as a key part of the Belfast skyline, Belfast traditionally an industrial city, are to be removed. And what's going to replace the Harland and Wolff shipyard? Housing. Well, more likely, executive flats or something like this. Just complete nonsense. So yes, this is a sad day if those 130 jobs are finally lost.
Okay.
Right, let's move on to the media, and this is the News Media Association, which as they say, is the voice of national, regional and local news brands. And so what have they been complaining about? Well, they've been complaining about the transparency of the technology giants like Google and Facebook. So they're saying that these companies should reveal the monetary value extracted from the news industry. This is through advertising and also reuse of so-called content creators' content. So the tech platform should be required to reveal the monetary value they extract from UK news content annually, and to inform a greater understanding of the digital advertising value chain, apparently. And this follows on from the Competition and Markets Authority, who announced in early July that they intend to look at the role of Google, Facebook and the other tech companies and intermediaries in the complex and opaque ad tech market. So what have they been saying? A US study found that Google received an estimated $4.7 billion from US news publishers' content in 2018. Where do they extract value from publisher content? Directly or indirectly, they should negotiate fairly with publishers to determine how much the value should be shared in order to ensure an appropriate level of compensation to publishers for the use of their content. This is all quite ironic, really, because if mainstream media is shouting about this, well, alternative media and alternative commentators shouting about it as well. So here is FairTube, which is a campaign that was launched a few months ago now to get more fairness and transparency for all YouTube creators. And this is, they've established a YouTubers union. This is being run out of Germany. And they're also encouraging people that are in Germany to join the IG Metal union. And they propose a number of things, for example, publishing all categories and decision criteria that affect monetization and views of videos, give clear explanations for individual decisions, if a video is demonetized, for example, and so on. So this applies to everybody, not just mainstream media. It's a bit ironic that mainstream media chooses to attack so many people that are providing useful content on social media, not just themselves, but it's only themselves that they're looking out for here with the pressure that they're attempting to put on.
Yeah, it's getting pretty messy. Why do we need free press? This article I found immensely disturbing. It's The Guardian. UK Council refused to host Palestinian event over anti-Semitism fears. And this relates to Tower Hamlets. And as the subheadline says here, Tower Hamlets officials did not divulge the real reason for turning down the big ride for Palestine. So the article says that officials at London Council refused to host a charity event in aid of Palestinian children. They did not tell the organisers the decision was based on fears their criticism of Israel could breach anti-Semitic guidelines. This only came to light because the charity itself tackled Tower Hamlets with freedom of information, and so they were able to see some of the internal dialogue, but this was not said externally. So the council told the Big Ride for Palestine, which has raised nearly 150,000 for sports equipment for children in Gaza since 2015, that their event's political connotations meant that the closing rally of this year's bike ride could not go ahead in the borough without problems. Officials told organiser there was a risk speakers might express views which contradicted the council's policy on community cohesion and equality. Well, that was untrue, because behind the scenes, council staff raised fears of a real risk that the event and its organisers could be seen as having breached the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism because of references on the website to apartheid and ethnic cleansing. So IHRA, of course, was the system adopted by the Labour Party that we talked about last week, and Tower Hamlets Labour-controlled council, they adopted it, and now we can see that this so-called anti-Semitic legislation being used, we could say covertly or even by deceit, in order to close down an event. And the council effectively lies, backing that legislation to stop a charity, a fundraising event going ahead. Now, what I found interesting was there was a quote from the head of sports, leisure, culture at Tower Hamlets Council in that article. It said, in a separate email, the council's head of sports, leisure and culture said she felt the event should be refused because the council has recently adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and there are concerns about the content of the organiser's website with regard to this. Now, I went on to Tower Hamlets Council thinking I was going to find a picture of that individual, but I could not find one. In fact, a very confusing website as who was doing what job. So if anybody can help out with who that person was, and I find it interesting that The Guardian didn't name that person, and I guess that's because The Guardian was too frightened of having a finger pointed at it saying anti-Semitic maybe. We'll see.
Okay, quick reminder that if you like what the UK column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. You can join us there and take part in on the community website in the discussions that are going on there.
Excellent, and we're going to say thank you to the supporters who turned up at the court hearing, Southwark Crown Court on Friday. That was David Noakes, was summoned to court for removal of proceeds of crime, so they were after really the last of his assets. But this turned out to be a pretty interesting hearing. It was good to see so many people, estimates between 70 and 100, but I believe only 11 were actually eventually allowed into the court. This is part of a video you can easily find online. Ian Crane was at the hearing as well, and he did an interview with David. So I've just taken part of it here. David, very courageous, because when he started the interview with Ian Crane, he immediately said GC-MAF is the body's way of curing cancer, discovered in 1980. The government, the MHRA and their predecessors have killed 2 million people over 25 years by concealing GC-MAF from the public. If put in the NHS now, GC-MAF could save the lives of 120,000 people a year, and it is this Southwark Court and the MHRA that are preventing these people from having their lives saved. So David wasn't missing a chance here to actually reinforce the fact that the government refusing, the British government refusing to deal with the real issue of the effectiveness of GC-MAF. But what happened with the court was that they got to the court to discover there wasn't a hearing. Well, that's how it appeared. So together with John Smith, they challenged Southwark Court as to what was going on. It appeared that the hearing had been cancelled without telling David, which is of course unlawful itself. So he pressed, and they did eventually get a hearing. But David had dismissed his legal team in order to represent himself. And I think that what was happening was some dialogue between the dismissed team and the court, which caused
seems
this
to
problem.
happen quite a bit, doesn't it?
It does seem to happen quite a bit when people dismiss a legal team thinking, thank goodness I've got rid of them. They're in the background still talking to the courts as if nothing had happened. So this is part of what came out in the interview. They knew that the CPS and MHRA would not be here. David dismissed his legal team some 2 to 3 weeks ago. That was done to procedure. The courts were notified. David presented a challenge document to court. What they've done is that despite being dismissed, the legal team have been speaking to the court, and they decided to throw out the case today. They've been challenged, and they need to establish authority. We've established a power of attorney via the common law court. Now, they eventually did force a hearing, and that's resulted in there's going to be another hearing this coming week, and we'll put out more detail on that when we've got it. But fascinating to see. The minimum we can say is that now that the court system is being challenged over David's case, it's all got a little bit squidgy. So the confidence seems to have gone. But probably the position of Lynn Thayer is the most dangerous at the moment, because she's still facing extradition to France.
Now, a bit of controversy over the weekend for the delightful Priti Patel, who of course is the new Home Secretary, because she said, quite frankly, with more police officers out there and greater police presence, I want criminals to literally feel terror at the thought of committing offences. And quite a number of people criticised her somewhat for this language, bearing in mind that, of course, everything that is coming out of the Tory government over the last number of years has been about the alleged rise of right-wing extremism and terrorism and all this kind of stuff. The question is, who are the terrorists? And really, perhaps we're getting the first clue openly from the British government as to what their thinking is on this subject.
I've read this little bit a couple of times, Mike, and the first thing I pull out of it is I want to literally feel terror at the thought, criminals to literally feel terror at the thought of committing offences. So we've got this thought police aspect coming in already, but we create a country where there's terror, and she's proud of this. Very dangerous individual.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, okay. This week is the final week of UK Column News before the summer break, so the UK Column will not be producing any news between the 12th and the 27th of August. We will be back on Wednesday the 28th, and Friday this week will be the last before the summer holiday. And a reminder, of course, that alternativeview.co.uk is where you need to go if you want to get tickets for AV 10.1. And that's taking place on Sunday the 27th of October. You will be speaking at that.
Indeed. And it's getting easier and easier to put that talk together, Mike,
Well,
because
indeed.
as Ian Grain correctly pointed out, we've got a culture of deceit, a pantomime, and that pantomime is becoming ever more apparent around us.
Now, I'm sure many people have seen more shocking videos coming out from France over the weekend, but nonetheless, here we have the Metro and Rob Waugh, and the headline is, has the BBC been ordered to stop reporting on Yellow Vest protests? He says, is there a sinister conspiracy at work to silence reporting of Yellow Vest protests with the BBC and others gagged by a government D-notice since last year? No, of course there isn't, but that hasn't stopped a bonkers conspiracy theory circulating and being forwarded by people who should know better. Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson tweeted an image first circulated on 4chan claiming that the BBC had been silenced via a government notice and told not to report inflammatory content about the Yellow Vests. It is self-evidently rubbish. A quick glance at the BBC site reveals dozens of stories about Yellow Vests, including reports of police officers pulling guns on protesters. Pearson deleted the tweet and apologised for being gullible. He goes on to talk about what is a D-notice, but there were two little comments in this article that really grabbed my attention, Brian. First of all, conspiracy theorists and low-rent news outlets love to claim that mainstream news outlets have been silenced via D-notices on various issues, fueling the idea of fake news. Now, even if that were true, Brian, it is a fair criticism, is it not, that when so-called low-rent news outlets are reporting on issues which the mainstream are not, you have to ask the question, why are they not?
Well, that's always the problem. That's always the question. And you can also say it's a very big part of the reason that so many people are now producing media themselves, because the information is not being reported by papers.
Absolutely. And he ends this article with probably the best comment I've seen from any mainstream journalist. Again, the Salisbury Novichok attacks saw right-wing blogs and chemical weapons truthers claiming a D-notice was in force. So this guy, by the way, on his this guy Rob Waugh on his Twitter feed, is proud to highlight that one of his readers labelled him as the cockwomble of all journalists, and really he is, because when he starts talking about some pretty serious academics in this country as chemical weapons truthers, he is not living in the real world.
Well, he's not credible.
No.
He's not credible. And what can people do to speak to Rob Waugh? Is get on his Twitter page and start challenging him.
Absolutely.
Is the answer.
Absolutely. Now, of course, the big news from the United States has been these two so-called mass shootings. But I'm fascinated by, and Patrick Henningsen will be back on the news with us on Wednesday, Brian. And he no doubt will have much more on this. But I'm just fascinated by this from CBS News. White terrorism may be on the rise, and we're starting to see more and more of this rhetoric. Rob Waugh expressing a little bit of this, when he's using the language that he is, the suggestion that conspiracy theory is a right-wing extremist thing, which leads to right-wing terrorism, and therefore anybody that's speaking or talking about anything which is outside the mainstream news narrative is considered dangerous. This seems to be more and more, or a pretty dark aspect of this type of event. We've got the other thing I would say about this, the Independent here, it took New Zealand just 6 days to ban semi-automatic weapons. America, are you listening? And it seems to me, Brian, you may have a different view, but it seems to me that getting rid of weapons, guns, is dealing with a symptom once again, not dealing with the underlying problem. If these types of events are happening in the United States, is it actually any worse than what's going on in London with knives and machetes?
Or throwing children off buildings.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have a fundamental problem with our societies at the moment, which is being expressed through things like guns and knives and machetes. Getting rid of guns, knives and machetes doesn't solve the underlying problem.
Well, the other thing is, of course, you don't. I mean, that's a pretty naive headline to suggest that you've got rid of automatic weapons from New Zealand, because where are the automatic weapons going to be? They're going to be in criminal hands under the surface. It'll only be decent citizens who will be denied the automatic weapons. The criminals are still going to have access to those weapons. And of course, exactly the same applies in America, which is why you see that the crime is down in the gun states. Yeah, so it goes on. Well, I'll just end on the fact that we are continuing to do work into ICSA's Nottingham Child Abuse Report. And on Friday, we did speak to the inquiry to ask them why the only mention of the death of children in Nottingham care was in the section on absconding in the report. This produced a rather blustery response from the media team, so we followed it up with an email asking some rather more pertinent points about why that death was in absconding and not in a section on death of children in care. And we've also asked how many children have died in Nottingham children's care facilities during the period that ICSA's been looking at. And we've also asked some other details. Now, they've said to us that they can't respond until the solicitor gets back on Wednesday. So we're going to wait for that. But it is a glaring omission in Alexa J's report that the death of children has simply been swept under the carpet, even though child abuse survivors were coming forward saying that children had died in facilities. On Friday, they tried to indicate, well, deaths was simply the responsibility of the coroner, not for us. So we've put our concerns in writing and we're waiting to see what sort of response we get. That's it for today. We will be back at the same time on Wednesday, and I think Patrick Henningsen will be joining you, Mike, for that session. Who owns the blue bucket? That is a question you'll have to wait until the end of the summer break, and we'll let you know. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.